Hey, how's it going? Good to see you. My name is Josh, and welcome to Read the Bible. What we're doing is we're reading the story of Jesus from the account of Mark, and just picking up a little bit each day. I hope you've read up to this point because we've seen Jesus doing some extraordinary things. Um, uh, Yesterday, as we read through Mark 1, we saw him do a couple of incredible miracles. He cast out an unclean spirit. He healed Simon's mother-in-law from a fever, and then people crowded around him from everywhere. But he said he's come to preach, and so he's going to keep moving on. So let's see what happens next. If you've got a Bible, open up to Mark chapter 1, and we're going to start just after he's healed a man with leprosy. We're starting, oh, sorry, spoilers. Just after he said we've got to go elsewhere. So let's pick it up at verse 39. Mark 1, verse 39. So Jesus traveled throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons. A man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus was indignant. He reached out his hand and he touched the man. "I am willing," he said. "Be clean." Immediately, the leprosy left him and he was cleansed. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. "See that you don't tell this to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them." Instead, he went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news. And as a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. Yet the people still came to him from everywhere. A few days later, when Jesus again entered Capernaum, the people heard that he had come home. They gathered in such large numbers that there was no room left, not even outside the door, and he preached the word to them. Some men came, bringing to him a paralyzed man carried by four of them. Since they could not get him to Jesus because of the crowd, they made an opening in the roof above Jesus by digging through it, and then they lowered the mat the man was lying on. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralyzed man, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now some teachers of the law were sitting there thinking to themselves, "Why does this fellow talk like that? He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" Immediately, Jesus knew in his spirit that this was what they were thinking in their hearts. And he said to them, "Why are you thinking these things? Which is easier, to say to this paralyzed man, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Get up, take your mat, and walk'? But I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." So he said to the man, "I tell you, get up, take your mat, and go home." He got up, took his mat, and walked out in full view of them all. And this amazed everyone, and they praised God, saying, "We have never seen anything like this." Isn't that extraordinary what we saw Jesus do just then? If you're watching along and you've got questions, just shoot them in the comments here. What did you notice? Well, first, Jesus shows that he's willing to heal. This man with leprosy comes up, a man you can't touch, a man you can't even be in the presence of because of the fear of contracting this disease. But because of that, this is a man who's cut off from society. He's untouchable. And his question to Jesus isn't, "Are you able to do this?" but "Are you willing?" And Jesus reaches out and shows compassion. And then the next thing happens where he's teaching again. He's in a house. Some guys bring a paralyzed man. They trying to get him to Jesus to get healed. They dig through the roof. They lower him down, and then Jesus does something even more surprising than just heal him. What does he do? He forgives his sins. And then he knows the questions that are coming. Who is this man? How can anyone but God forgive sins? Because sin is that problem between us and God. Sin is where we rebel against God. And we miss the mark with how we're supposed to live. Like we fail to love him as we should, to love him with all of our heart and soul and mind and strength. And we fail to love the people around us as we should. We fail to love our neighbors as ourselves. But Jesus looks at this man and he says, I'm going to forgive your sins. I declare them forgiven. And they're like, that's what God can do. Only God can do. So Jesus says, now which is easier? I don't know, what do you think? Which is easier? To say your sins are forgiven, or to say to a paralyzed man, get up and walk? Well, that's exactly what he does. And the people who are standing there aren't stupid, right? And they're not going, this is a normal, ordinary thing. We see this all the time. They are amazed. They say, we have never seen anything like this. I've never seen anything like that. That is incredible. Who can come and forgive sins? Who has the authority to do that? Who walks amongst unclean people, touches them, and rather than becoming unclean themselves, makes them clean? Who can say to a paralyzed man, I forgive your sins, and say, just to prove that that's the case, now get up and walk and go home? He takes these two broken men and he restores them back to health, to society, but he does this deeper thing, doesn't he? He forgives the man's sins. He restores him to God. Now, the question that Mark wants us to ask is, who do you think Jesus is? Who do you think he is? If only God can forgive sins. Well, who does that make Jesus? Thanks for joining us today to read along. I'm looking forward to the next week because we've met the teachers of the law, these religious leaders. The next part, we start to see them come into sharp conflict with Jesus. So, join us for that as we keep reading the Bible about the life of Jesus.